Hello, 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 and good evening to you, gentlemen. How are we doing? Hello to everyone watching at home. Welcome to another episode of Potstilled Live. This time is a fantastic takeover from the guys at Loughran Family Malt. I am absolutely delighted to be joined by Director James Loughran and, of course, Head of Distillery Relationship Management, Angus Giggins. Sirs, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Hey, Matt.
Fantastic, Matt. Thanks for having us. Great to be here.
I see. Angus, where are you joining us from this evening?
It's a sign of a good company that the boss is still at work in the field and the employees at home enjoying a whiskey. So cheers, James.
Exactly. I was going to say, James is very clearly outstanding in his field. I had to get that pun in at the beginning. An evening all from Conor Ryan of Pierce Lyons dropping in. I know we'll be talking about that a little later on. Of course, guys, we have a fantastic takeover this evening. We're all going to be talking about grains in Irish distilling and brewing. It is, as people often forget, distilling is an agricultural industry, and without the people like Loughran's Family Malt out there making some of the most fantastic grains in the world, we wouldn't be making any whiskey. So throughout, we're going to be talking about the differences in grains. We're also going to be talking about some very interesting qualities that make good grains. I know James has some examples of what makes bad distilling grains. And then, of course, the rise in the interest, of course, in rye in the Irish whiskey industry. And all of that is to come. Do let us know in the comments if you do have any questions this evening. It's not often that I have a three-person panel going, so we're going to be having lots of opportunities to talk between the distillery relationship side and what people, what the pull is from the industry. And then I suppose, James, from an on-the-ground point of view, what you're seeing from kind of a push from the agricultural industry, as it were. Dave Cummins dropping into the comments. He's looking forward to this one. Good evening, Dave. Always fantastic to have you on a Thursday evening. And I know that there's a load of different things going on this evening. Obviously, Thursday nights, I feel like I started early in the live streaming world, but Thursday have become a hot commodity in terms of live streaming. So thank you to everyone who's dropping in. Dara dropping in from Clonell over in Scotland saying he's expecting a few grains of truth. So the puns are coming in. I'm loving it. Yeah.
You already.
Audible groans. It's good. Eric always coming in from Belgium. Good evening to you, sir. And Kevin coming in from Germany. How are you doing? Happy to learn. And I feel like we are going to get a good few nuggets of great information. So, guys, who wants to take us off? Who are Loughran Family Malt and what do you guys do?
I'll start. I'll let you sit there and enjoy your evening off and enjoy your whiskey. James Loughran's my name. I run Loughran Family Malt. So we're here on a my family's been farming on this farm since 1908. So I guess that makes me a sixth generation barley farmer. And around about 2014, it became apparent to me that we had been struggling really to find a way of generating value out of what we do to allow us to reinvest in our farm and allow us a way of farming our land sustainably, both economically and environmentally. And we were trying to find a way of adding value to what we did, and began really by growing barley for the craft brewing industry, getting that malted and then supplying that malt to craft breweries across Ireland and also abroad. And that expanded a little bit into some other brewing ingredients such as hops, specialty malts and things. But always the goal was to find a way of driving value out of what it is that we farm. And obviously, as craft distilling and the Irish distilling industry has grown, so too has the need for fantastic grains. And that led us down the road of expanding the portfolio a little bit. Angus bringing on board and really trying to find a way of growing fantastic grains for Irish distilleries, because in many ways, as a lot of the history of Irish distilling got lost over the last 80 to 100 years, a lot of the things that the Irish distilleries used, a lot of the features of the grains that was important to them, a lot of that mystery got lost as well. And it really became hard for us to talk to distillers and find out, what it is that they wanted in a grain, because realistically, with the best intentions, the history wasn't there. to inform the decision. So we kind of had to make some trials and errors, talk to some distillers, grow some crops, try and figure out what worked, and really try and strike a balance, which is what we think we're doing now. We hope we're doing, and we think some of our distilling partners agree with us. And the goal is to grow fantastic grains, which are of a higher spec than traditional agricultural grains, traditional animal feed grains, which perform really, really well in the distillery. Help a distiller make fantastic liquid with really, really efficiently, but also impart a lot of terroir, a lot of flavors, a lot of essential oils and other characteristics into that spirit, so that when the finished spirit is made, it's something that it adds a level of uniqueness to it that is otherwise difficult to obtain. And that's really what it is that we're trying to do here. We want to really see Irish farming, Irish tillage farming, Irish cereal production benefit from the fantastic developments in Irish distilling. But in order for the agricultural sector to benefit, we need to deliver. We need to deliver more in terms of quality, more in terms of flavour, and more in terms of benefits for the distillery, so that together we can all go improve in what we're doing. And that's really the goal here, and that is what we're trying to do. So yeah.
I'm loving it. Well, remember, guys, in the comments, do ask your questions, because very rarely we have such specific experts in their fields. We often speak to brand managers and malts, brand managers and barrel experts and distillers, but this is the first time we've had representatives come on and talk to the ins and outs of the grains. And one question, though, I have for you before we get into the nitty gritty of it. One thing, as I said, people often forget distilling is an agricultural industry. And there's Dave Cummins dropping in saying he bet that you guys didn't enjoy the frost that there was there last night. And what usually is Ireland better suited than our European counterparts in terms of growing grain? Because I working in distilleries often have that opinion, but you lads are on the ground and would know a lot better than me. Realistically,
I suppose, a lot of our European or world global colleagues in agriculture, anytime there is a fascination with Ireland, obviously as a country, there's a fascination with Irish people. There's a fascination with Irish food produce. There's a fascination with Irish alcohol and whiskey. A lot of our, as I said, people you talk to throughout the world would be envious of our climate, our low temperatures, our abundant rainfall, and our soil quality. They lead themselves to producing quality crops. They obviously, as we'll go into probably in more detail, those climatic conditions lead to quite a few challenges as well, as we see getting frost in the first week of May leads to challenges. But on a whole, definitely our climate is excellently suited to produce top quality cereal crops.
It feels to me like, I think every Irish person, having either lived abroad or gone abroad, you miss staples. Everyone misses Irish milk. Everyone misses Irish butter, Irish bread. Kerrygold's #2 selling butter in the United States, which I still can't even fathom. There's something in Irish produce that in the climate, in the produce, that really stands head and shoulders above all else. And we're going to be talking a lot about that. But one question has come in for James, if I can swap him back between you there, Angus. Dave Cummins wants to know, what is your favorite grain to grow? And we might as well just start there and give us a little deep dive into your thought process.
I grew up around barley, and barley is a crop which I really enjoy growing. I think it's a fantastic plant. I think what spring barley does in its life cycle is absolutely amazing. It has it gets all of its work done in about 100 days, which is a phenomenal achievement for a plant to go from seed to almost mature, or certainly all of the important bits done. But over the last couple of years, we've been doing some work with rye, and I'm actually standing in a field of rye this evening. And rye for me has been a fantastic crop to grow, and it's been, strange as it may seem to hear, it's been a lot of fun. Because there's been very little local or Irish knowledge about how to grow rye and what it is that it needs, and what it takes to help it perform. But the thing which is most interesting about, for me as a grower about rye, is the speed at which it grows and the scale at which it grows. It's a very, very tall crop. It grows much taller than barley, and I'll be able to show you that in a moment. But what that means for us as growers, we get very quick feedback on the decisions that we make. So you can see how within 3 or 4 days or a week, what way the plants are growing, and whether that performance has improved or disimproved since you may have done something in the recent past. And that's fantastic, because a lot of other plants don't give that kind of level of feedback, but rye does. And it just is, it's a wonderful crop to grow. It's fantastic in the rotation. It allows us to do work at a slightly different time of year. It also acts as a break crop, which is important because it helps with soil microbiology and the microbiome of the soil. And overall, it's just been something that we've had quite a bit of fun with recently. So yeah, I would say certainly more recently, rye would be my favorite, but still, spring barley.
If I could come in maybe against you, James, and in with my oat hat on, I suppose oats we saw, huge, probably seen as the least sexy of the cereal crops up until quite recently, hugely overlooked, and obviously our tradition in Ireland of oat growing stemming back centuries, and it was the backbone of Irish agriculture. It was the backbone of Irish country living. We're seeing, thankfully, a great move back towards oats, be it from the human nutrition side, livestock nutrition, and in a lot of conversations I've been having since I started to roll, a lot of distilleries are obviously looking more and more towards using oats. So that's great to see, and yeah, it's probably my favorite crop to see being grown.
Absolutely. Well, you know, you're preaching to the choir here a little bit, though. Where I'm gonna knock James out there for 1 second, give him a chance to come back. A very big fan myself of oats in distillation. Now, obviously, from a flavor point of view, you're getting very different flavors between the rye and the oats, and Fionn O'Connor is in the comments section here, and Michal Branach as well, head distiller down in Bowan, and obviously the two of them paired up to work with the Vintage Mash Bills campaign, which would have used, you know, Loughran oats, wheat, and rye. For the adjunct grains, and having tasted those distillates a little bit ahead of time in the public, the flavor contributions, even and I find it amazing. The flavor contributions in large scale are amazing, but even from a GI compliant point of view, where you can only use 5%, you know, Bowan was running a mash bill that had 5% oats, and it tasted amazing. And they took out 1.25% oats and replaced it with rye. And the flavor difference was phenomenal, which I found amazing, because I thought myself, when I saw that it's minuscule, it's 1.25% out of 2 ton of grain. It's going to do nothing. And the flavor contribution was phenomenal. But, you know, oats has this fantastic contribution, and rye they're almost polar opposites in a way. And I think we're going to see a lot more influence and introduction or inclusion of those grains, you know, in distilling in Ireland, like you said. And as James said, there's a lot of history of, you know, rye, and as you said, there's a lot of history of oats in Ireland. And as Fionn will probably jump in with exact dates for me, but there's old Irish poems and stories of rye hundreds and hundreds of years ago. You know, there's, I think, is a feast of a food mountain some poet goes to in the fucking, I don't know, early hundreds, whatever, and it shows us that, you know, rye and oats are a very long, you know, heritage crop in the country. Now, I do have a load of there's is fun for me being the host a little bit, because there's a lot of questions coming through, and I want to ask you guys a load of different questions myself, but I don't want to ignore the comment section either. Mark Lonergan then in Cork wants to know, what are the main challenges facing grain farmers at the moment, in your opinions? And I don't know who wants to take that one, but I might pop you into James. I don't know if you want to take that. I just threw you up.
I'll have a chat. You know, it's I suppose we're facing challenges on a couple of fronts. Ultimately, because first one is just from a commercially viability perspective. Cereal production in Ireland has fallen. If I remember the stats right, I think it's 15% in total volume over the last 20 years, and I think it's 25% over the last 35 years. So tillage and cereal production in Ireland has fallen dramatically, and that's really for economic reasons. Production of grain in Ireland, despite the fact that we're able to achieve some of the highest yields in the world, we also have some of the highest production costs in the world, because our climate, it leads us down a relatively high input pathway, and that means that in a lot of cases, production of grain in Ireland is very difficult to make it economically sustainable, which is what inspired me to begin down this road. So we got that challenge. The other challenge that we're dealing with is the fact that the climate is absolutely changing. We're here on I think it's the 5th of May today. I'd frost in the windscreen this morning. I'd frost in the windscreen yesterday. I expect it again tomorrow, and it's really, really challenging. We shouldn't have frost this late in the year. It's been a cold spring. It's been a dry spring. We had a drought last year. We had a drought in 2018 as well. The weather is becoming a lot more volatile, and us in the farming industry are at the front of it. And it's in spite of that, those changes, one of the other problems that the Irish farming in general has is that our industry is portrayed in the media as being one of polluters, one of hedgerow removers, one of the serious greenhouse gas emitters, one of the contributors to climate change, and that is sad, and at best it's a false representation, because us as farmers, we are literally at the bleeding edge of climate change. We know exactly what it is, and we will be the first ones who are directly impacted by it every day. And we certainly understand the impacts that we have in the environment, and we know that our impact is less than it used to be. Our impact will be less in the future than it is today, and we need to figure out how to farm in a better way, a more environmentally sensitive point of way, but also we need the greater world around us to help understand that we're in the middle of it, and we do know what it is that's going on. So I would say those are the real challenges facing tillage production specifically, in Irish agriculture in general today.
Honest, and I like it. It's broad and honest. So if anyone has any specific questions about that as well, do put them into the comment section, because as I said, we rarely have such specific experts into part of the brewing distilling industry here. And do you there's a lot of questions coming in, so I just want to make sure I don't miss any of them as well. Kevin wants to know how many varieties of grain do you grow, and does it make which is best for distilling and brewing, I suppose, is the tail end of that question.
Yeah, so we grow barley, wheat, oats, and rye. So four species of cereal, and then within each of those species there would be a number of different varieties of grain. So, for example, our spring barley would be made up of, we would have fields of a variety called Gangway, we would have fields of a variety called Splendor, and fields of a variety called Erigal. So we have different varieties from each of those crops. And the reason we have different varieties is that each one will have slightly different characteristics. It may be more resistant to some particular disease. It may ripen at a slightly different time, so it spreads the workload. It may be taller, it may be shorter. It may have some characteristics that we like. And it's always good just to spread your risk around, because you don't want all your eggs in one basket. So those are those are the main those are the crops we grow. And in terms of what's best for distilling, well, ultimately your whiskey mash is going to be made up of mostly malted barley. So that's going to be spring in Ireland. That will be mostly spring grown barley, with particularly for distilling a particularly low protein of below about 10.8%, 9.8% protein, and that's going to make up the majority of your mash. Obviously, then if you guys know yourselves, if you're making a Potstilled, you can have up to 30% unmalted barley in there, and then 5% other grains, be it oats or rye. But it'll be interesting, I think, though, to see how if or when the GI changes, how different grains are going to allow to be included at different ratios.
I mean, for people at home that aren't aware, starch and proteins are inversely related. So the more protein you have, the less starch you have. And obviously in distilling, I see a lot of nodding heads. We want as much starch as possible and none of the proteins. And in feed barley, you're the complete opposite. You want as much protein as possible, and the starches are irrelevant. And from a grower's point of view, and I see someone in the comments actually asking about managing nitrogen levels as well, which obviously ties in there. What are the differences in the growing feed barley and distilling barley? And then Angus, I do want to come back to you as well and see what the industry is pulling as well from that point of view after asking James here. So And your commenter is spot on there about nitrogen. Nitrogen, protein is pretty much a function of nitrogen. So the more nitrogen we apply to the crop, the bigger it'll grow, the faster it'll grow, but the higher the protein, and the higher it'll yield, theoretically. But also the higher the protein content will be. So if we keep adding nitrogen to the crop, we will drive up the protein content, which is wonderful if you are looking to finish or fatten animals on it. And it's wonderful for a farmer who gets paid by the ton. It's utterly horrific if you're a distiller. You don't want that at all, because every time I add protein, I'm taking away your starch, and your starch is what you want to make alcohol. So us as growers have to find a balance. We have to figure out a way of maintaining an economically viable yield with a reduced level of nitrogen to keep that protein level down. And there's a couple of ways we do that to try and achieve the best result. First and simplest way is basically what we would do is for malting barley is we give malting barley every chance. So it gets the best of everything. Every farmer will have a spectrum of fields from better to worse. Your malting barley will always go in your best fields. Your seeding program will start early and will finish, when the weather dictates later on. So therefore, your malting barley gets the best chance. It goes in first, and then it will usually then just get more attention throughout the year. It really is like it's either a favorite child or a problem, or a favorite child or a problem child. I'm not sure which, but malting barley gets the best of everything, with a view of giving it the best shot of getting a decent yield without having to load on all that nitrogen throughout the growing season. And that's the main way that we as growers would work with malting barley to try and get barley for a distillery that would do a good job. Oats, rye, and wheat is something similar. Again, we're trying not to load up the protein content too much, because that will take away from the alcohol. So yeah, those are kind of the main agronomic differences from a growing perspective. Angus? And again, remember, everyone in the comments, throw in your questions. I'm happy to put them to the guys as long as they're allowed to be on screen. I'm going to swap you across the screens and bring in Angus back in again. Angus, I want to know, from a distillery point of view and a distillery relationship point of view, what are you seeing as important, or what's and I keep saying the pull, because there's obviously a two-way system here. There's an agricultural push, and then there's an industrial pull. But what are you seeing in terms of distilleries looking for? Is there more experimentation? Is there more yield focus, or what are the people coming to you looking for?
Yeah, well, I suppose To be honest, my background is agricultural, and first and foremost trained as an animal nutritionist. So I'm coming from a different perspective, as James has talked about, from growing barley for feeding to animals. You're obviously have different targets to those that are growing barley to supply into the distilling industry. Um, from the conversations, it's been hugely interesting. Obviously, been involved in agriculture most of my life, we've always been aware of the existence of the distilling industry, but you never really followed it more than the barley going out of the field at harvest time, and possibly at the other end then when you're going to buy a bottle of whiskey, or in the bar buying a whiskey. You didn't really acknowledge what happened in between. So that's been a huge eye opener for me, to get my foot in the door of the whiskey industry to see what's happening. And obviously, it's been good and bad timing. In that, bad timing from a lockdown perspective, but good timing from the trajectory that Irish whiskey is on at the moment, and it's an exciting, hugely exciting industry to be involved in. From the conversations we've been having in the limited time, definitely a huge degree of interest in the adjunct grains. Seems to be a lot more willingness to experiment with those grains, as we touched on there, in particular the rye, the oats, lesser so on wheat. But yeah, there definitely seems to be a lot of work going on in the background in distilleries, trying to see what might work, and what they can possibly get from the different grains, what flavors can be imparted, the quality of the distillate that comes from the different grains. They all seem to be definitely looking at those aspects. An important factor, obviously, for us at harvest time is, and that's, as James said, the problem child or the special child. You're hoping that everything hits the target for malting, but obviously we'll have to make the harsh decision then at harvest time. What makes the grade, what doesn't make the grade. So what goes for the distilling industry, and what goes to the animal feed sector. And then, of course, as we probably go into more detail, screening those distilling grains so that only that highest quality, highest starch content grains are ending up in a bag being delivered to the distillery.
And there's a question in here as well. It's an interesting one. Are people looking for grains? You know, when we talk about distilling in Ireland, and somewhat in brewing as well, you kind of talk about, you know, maybe 5 core grains. You've got malted barley, unmalted barley, your big 2. You've got oats, most plentiful after that, wheat and rye. Now, oats and wheat, depending if you're brewing or distilling, will probably be flipped. But are people looking for grains, or you know, inquiring that aren't typically grown in Ireland, or perhaps not typically amply grown or used in distilling? As you know, are people looking for sorghum or triticale, or I never know how to pronounce that, the cross between wheat and rye? Is that are people looking for that more experimentation, or is wheat, oats, and rye already an experimentation? I see James shaking his finger here, so I don't know if I need to pull him back in or not. So
sorry, I didn't mean to shake my finger at you. I was just thinking about what your question made me go to.
Hang on, I'll swap you out here for 1 second. There you go. For it. Don't worry, we can all hear you anyway. Give you a big screen.
We haven't specifically noticed an inquiry for unusual grains, like you mentioned, sorghum or perhaps buckwheat or spelt or that kind of stuff. But what we have got, which has been interesting, is inquiries for specialty malts. So roasted malts, chocolate malts, caramels, malts like that. We would handle quite a lot of malts like that for other specialist malting companies. And we have had a number of distilleries inquire, and some using some of those further refined and further processed malts, some of those especially kiln malts. to give very unusual or very extra additional characteristics into the whiskey. So be it malts such as, like I said, like a roasted malt or a chocolate malt, where you're bringing an extra astringency and an extra bitterness in, or perhaps in some cases a caramel malt, whereby you're trying to bring actually extra sweetness into the spirit. And it's been those conversations that we found to be the most interesting, because as far as we can tell, this just doesn't really happen very much. It certainly hasn't happened in Ireland at all. And I don't believe it happens very much in other whiskey, in Scotch or other whiskies. Although I'm quite happy to be corrected on that. And having spoken to a couple of distillers about it, and when we show them, the range of malts that are out there, and see their eyes light up, and being able to walk through a warehouse and do tastings and let them have those experiences of getting some rich malts in and figure out what they might be able to distill with it, it just opens up a huge range of options that up to now haven't really been considered, and they've been staring us right in the face. But with the ability to add these malts, and if we want, still stay within the GI requirements, because it's
because they're malt.
It is malted barley. It's malted barley, so we can do what we want, and it just gives a huge amount of options. So yeah, that's what we've seen, the curiosity.
And it's interesting you say that, because part of my job and my day job is looking after contract distilling and whatnot. And I actually wrote a Potstilled mash bill for somebody. The brief I was given was it needs to be unique, but also GI compliant. And I was told no oats. They were really against oats, which I was whatever. They already lost points in my book. That's fine. But what I made them was a mash bill that was high on yield, but I had crystal and acid malt in there, or not acid malt, chocolate malt. And it was funny because what came back to me was they were the people I was talking to were from a booze business, and they were involved in the 80s and the 90s, and they were like, crystal malt is a bad word. We don't want crystal malt. The yields are going to be terrible. And it was hilarious for me, because if you talk about Bushmills have a whiskey expression called 1608. It was kind of a millennium edition, where they had a distiller in for a while who experimented with crystal malt, and it is possibly one of the most sought after Bushmills expressions in the country, and it's that crystal malt component that really, there's crystal malt in it and everyone loves it, so everyone equates the crystal malt component to what everyone loves. And it's so funny, because it was to include that was to bring in not only that great flavor, but those buzzword points as well. And I'm going to say it right now: if you're a distillery or a person with a brand and you're contract distilling and you're putting specialty malts into a mash bill, I will give you free advertising here. We'll come in and talk about it, and we'll bring James and Angus back. We'll talk about it to no end. But that's fantastic to hear, because there's so much between, as you said, there's caramel malt and acid malt and black malt, chocolate malt. And again, you can make a single malt that's 40 different malt types. It still falls within single malt, and you can have a really fucking crazy single malt with that. And I'm delighted to hear. Sorry, we didn't prep this. I just got really excited about this. But it's very cool to hear that people are asking.
It is, and I didn't actually realize Bushmills had done that. So maybe I'll if you have any of it, I'll spin around someday and give me a little gram. But that sounds interesting. I didn't realize that it had been done to that level of degree before. That's really, really cool.
It's the only Irish whiskey released on the market that I know about that has that element. Most people use kind of if you're going into brewing malts, people just use an ale malt, which akins to distilling malt. I know one distillery that distilled a stout that they kind of brewed a stout and then distilled the stout. That also still not released either. But no one's really gone down that route, and I don't know if it's in fear of loss of yields, or if it's just, obviously there's an extra cost usually to specialty malts, and I don't know if that's an inhibitor, but maybe people, thankfully I come from a business that is all a distillery and a brewery, so I've been able to see kind of the two ends of it and come up with ideas to mash them together a little bit. But Would you see a lot of yields lost in darker roast malts or specialty roast malts?
Honestly, I don't have that data. I don't know.
That's all right.
There is a yield penalty, and I'm not going to I'm not going to waffle on that one because I'll get caught out. I don't.
James, don't worry. I thought I'd ask, and I just threw it out there. I have a question from Mahal Banach down in Boan.
Yeah.
He says, if barley is the favorite child, why did you sow rye in nice fields close to the house? Are oats, rye, and barley suited to certain fields or a wet field versus more sandy soil?
I just like looking at rye, and it's like I said, we don't grow that much of it, and I just wanted to keep an eye on it so I could see what was going on. We've only been growing it for a couple of years, and so yes, I'll have to go there. The different soils suit different crops. Yes, is the short answer. The biggest difference is barley, especially, is barley likes what would be known as, I suppose, lighter or sandier soils. It doesn't really like getting its feet wet. So soils that are really free draining suited. And you'd find them in Ireland. You'd find them down along the east coast and the band stretching from County Louth right down into Wexford and along the south coast into kind of as far as Middleton and Cork, and then maybe back up. There's fantastically light free draining soils around Kildare and Laois. So that's where you would see and Carlow as well. So that's where a lot of Ireland's great barley comes from. Wheat is quite different. Wheat doesn't mind getting its feet wet at all, and quite the opposite. It doesn't like being. It likes having a relatively significant amount of moisture, and works well in much heavier soils. So soils with a higher clay content, which are not as free draining, and you get them in slightly further inland areas, County Meath, North County Dublin, add into Tipperary and various parts of Carlow and Wexford, which don't have that heavier soil type or that lighter soil type that we associate with barley country. Rye, the short answer is I don't know. Like, we're still trying to figure it out, and because it's such a niche crop, there just isn't the data available to show which soil types it grows well on. We put it in a heavy field last year and a light field this year. Haven't seen any differences we can put down to the soil type, so don't know on that one. Oats. So yeah, the oats will grow on pretty poor soils actually. It'll do well on good ground, but it'll also do tolerably well on poor ground, whereas barley and wheat absolutely won't. And that's the reason why oats was such a widely grown crop in Ireland throughout the 1800s and into the early 1900s. In places today which haven't been out or haven't seen a cereal crop in 50 or 80 years, a lot of that country would have been down for oats. Those soil types which are maybe better suited to grass would grow tolerable crops of oats enough for subsistence farming to live on. So those are the kind of main differences between crops and soil types. There's other more technical differences which I used to know and I've forgotten in relation to cation exchange capacity and other nutritional requirements, but yeah, those are the kind of big ticket items there.
I suppose it'll be very interesting for us then to get the feedback. I know Michael and Sally Ann from Boan were actually down inspecting that field of rye, and they were down with us on one of the days we planted barley. For us then to get the feedback, obviously the fermentation will be different from grain to grain, and even from our specific fields, even within fields, pockets of soil types will impact the fermentation or the taste profile. To get that feedback then from, be it Michael or be it someone in a distillery, to tell us what kind of spirit yield they're getting off the different grains from different soil types will be really interesting for us, and it'll allow us to kind of improve our cropping plan and improve our product that's going to distilleries. That's again, when you mentioned what kind of conversations we have, a lot of distilleries are kind of approaching us to grow specific crops in specific fields that they can track from the day it's sown right through harvest until it's delivered to their distillery. That gives them a value added in that they're not just going to the market and buying whatever grain's available. It's a bespoke grain that's been grown and produced specifically for their distillery and their requirements.
So Angus, you mentioned there that Michal was in the comments, and he's distilling down in Bowan, which is, you're in County Louth, and Bowan Distillery, if anyone doesn't know, it's in Drogheda, County Meath, which is on the cusp, on the border.
It's the best part of County Meath, closest to Lard.
But when it comes to a distillery like that, or I have a lovely Pierce Lyons bottle here beside me, and as you mentioned earlier, you're doing some fantastically interesting projects with Pierce Lyons in County Meath as well. There's a value add there, but do you find distilleries coming to you with those requests? Is it, in your estimation, is it a marketing need, or the fact that the likes of, even from a sustainability point of view, the carbon miles of getting the oats and wheat and rye from 6 kilometers away is one thing, but knowing I've seen some of your fields that they have signs outside with what distillery they're being grown for and whatnot. There's a pride of place, there's a provenance. I don't want to go as far as terroir, because I know the terroir is a very divisive word, and French at that. We should really have an Irish word for it. But there, do you find that more and more distilleries are looking for that idea of a vertical integration of that story for whatever reason?
Oh, definitely, yeah. And you've kind of answered the question there in what you've said, in that it's the combination of reasons. It's the provenance, it's the traceability of knowing and being able to monitor then to see what the quality, what the spirit yield is like. And then also you've got the marketing story then when it goes to the customer, that unique story that they're able to dot up all the links in the story. That seems to be hugely interesting to the distilleries. I know you touched on, and I see Conor in the comments, Conor Ryan from Pierce Lyons Distillery. He's obviously one step ahead of the game there in that what the project that we're involved with at Alltech, in that growing the barley and the oats on their land in Dunboyne, and that grain will follow the whole process through into the distillery to produce a single farm Potstilled whiskey. Obviously, then with Alltech having their background in agriculture, their crop science team will be heavily involved, and we're hugely excited to see and use some of their products to see what will that impart on the final grain quality, the final taste profile of the grain. So yeah, it's really exciting project to be involved in.
And for, I suppose, from my point of view, outside looking in and in some ways inside looking out, how does Loughran malt, family malt, work? Is it all Loughran's farms, or do you work as a cooperative? Because for me, as an industry person looking into agriculture, and from I'll give you a little background into my job. I've worked with agriculture in the sense that we take in grain, and we also have orchards that I work with. So I work with the orchard keepers and who are fantastic, who think I'm hilarious. Because the first day they met me, they asked me if I had an agricultural background, and someone piped up behind me that the most agricultural background I had was leaving Dublin to go down to the orchard. So, so I can tell you a hell of a lot about apples, but I can't tell you a hell of a lot about growing grains. And do people, I suppose, is there that cooperative nature of grain growers? Is it a competitive industry? You know, is there, you know, in Irish independent distilleries, there's a lot of information sharing. You know, there's not a coopetition is a word I hate, but is kind of appropriate. It's kind of we're fighting Scotch or bourbon or Japanese. We're not fighting each other. Does that exist in Irish grain growing? Is there that kind of coopetition, if that makes sense?
Yeah,
I think, well,
go ahead.
sorry, yeah, but just to touch before James maybe goes into more detail on what you're doing. Definitely within agriculture as a whole, we are seeing that probably step away from mass-produced food, selling on to larger processors, supermarkets. It's probably been somewhat accelerated as a result of the COVID pandemic, in that the consumer's nearly driving it. If there's locally produced food, feed ingredients with a good story behind it, the consumer is probably looking to pay that premium for a product like that. It seems to be a move within agriculture as a whole, and that can only be a good thing, I think, from the sustainability of agriculture, both economically and environmentally. That if they have a more local food chain, it can only be a positive.
Before James jumps in there, I see him chomping at the bit. All I want to say is I really love that point, Angus. And I always kind of equate it when I was growing up. The internet made everything accessible, and people bought things from as far away as possible. I remember being, you know, with the internet, you could buy crap from Japan, and that was, if you got something from Japan, that was the most, or the US, even never mind the internet. If you got on a plane and went to Abercrombie and Fitch or whatever in the US, and someone came back with a Hollister hoodie or something, that was the coolest thing in the world. And we've kind of come weirdly full circle that the coolest thing now, at least in my circles of friends or whatnot, is physically as close to your fucking house as possible. Yeah. Is as cool as, and it's like people are like, you got that from fucking where? You bought that from fucking China? Like, I'm not saying fucking Azerbaijan or Japan or wherever. You got that from Australia? It's like, lads, you could have bought that up the road from Loughran's. Like, and I find that an amazing full circle that we went as physically as far away as possible. And as we became as connected, we became very, introverted as well in that way. But James, do you want to jump in there? I'll large screen you there.
Yeah, no, I suppose just to finish off on that, it is interesting that, we would have grown up, I'm guessing most people in who are watching this are children of the 80s and 90s, and those of us who would have grown up drinking, American bourbon and Russian vodka on Saturday nights out, and we didn't have the ability to drink a particularly broad range of Irish whiskies. It was very, very niche, very, very small, and it wasn't very trendy or cool. And it's phenomenal that now what we have available to us is such a wide range of exactly what you said, stuff that has been produced on a world-class quality level, literally on our doorsteps at this stage, where pretty much every significant town in Ireland has its own distillery almost. And that's, I think that's amazing. I really do. I think it's something that we need to be, we need to make sure we don't take for granted. It's phenomenal, and it wasn't there in the very, very recent past. Your question in relation to growing cooperative and that aspect of it, farming in general is pretty cooperative, and there is an element of competition between farmers normally in terms of access to land. But apart from that, farmers tend to form very, very strong cooperatives for processing, be it milk, for processing or for sourcing and buying ingredients. So Glanbia and Dairygold would be fantastic examples of farmers forming co-ops. Other ways that there tends to be a lot of cooperation, certainly locally, is in discussion groups, where you will get a small group of local farmers, normally 8 to 10, who live in kind of 10 to 15 mile radius, and they'll get together once a week for an hour or two, or maybe it might be once a month for an hour or two, at one of their members' farms, and discuss what's working well for them and what's not, and then learning from each other and sharing that information. So we do tend to see a huge amount of knowledge transfer like that, and agriculture is phenomenal, and I think quite unique as an industry for the way knowledge gets shared, from science and from research all the way through to the field, so to speak. In terms of our own ability for grain production and cooperation with other local farmers this year, so Harvest 21, I expect will be the last year that all of our grain will be grown by ourselves. Up until now, all the grain we've been selling has been produced ourselves, and it will be this year. I expect that from Harvest 22, that may change because we simply can't keep up with demand. We just don't have the ability to grow the acres. So
pause there. What kind of acres or what kind of hectares are you growing at the moment? So what are you exceeding?
So probably this year we hope to harvest for distilling purposes somewhere in the region of about 1,000 tons of wheat and barley. Barley, oats, and rye. So it's not insignificant, but in the global scheme of things, it's relatively small. So we're looking forward to maybe having a conversation with a couple of local farmers as we lead into the next growing season. Based here in North County Louth, who perhaps will grow some additional tonnage for us, and we'll give them a hand and share our knowledge with them. We'll be able to give them a pretty decent return on it, and they'll be able to grow a little bit of rye or barley or oats for use in distillers, provided it meets that high spec that we all need.
And I think, there's huge excitement among the farmers that we've had the conversation with, even organic farmers for certain requests, all showing huge levels of enthusiasm towards this type of arrangement. Again, that they're not just mass producing a cereal crop, chasing high yields just to be economically viable to sell it the gate at harvest time and never think about it again. So again, it leads back into what we were saying, that kind of special production, having a story behind it and being involved in a certain process, the distilling process, that they're all excited about.
Well, I'm cognizant we're coming to close to closing time, but I have a question from Fionnán O'Connor, who obviously was the mastermind behind the Vintage Mashless project with Boan. And he wants to know, have you had any requests for malted adjunct grains, the likes of malted wheat, malted oats, malted rye, and as Fionnán alluded to a little bit earlier on, I've had a lot of 7 a.m. car journeys around the country with him. And we used to have a beer in Ireland called Bulkin or Bullacean, which was without better historical details, kind of a 50-50 mash of malted barley and malted oats mixed together. And the greatest recounts that Fionnán can give me is the Irish loved it, and the reason we still know about it is the English wouldn't fucking shut up about how much they hated it. That they were used to gruit beers that had the likes of hops in it to keep it, and the wild Irish were drinking this crazy Bullacean Bulkin. Bullacean literally means madness of the head, or and forgive. And at this point, I could be confusing my adjectives of whether or not that was the distilled Bulkin or not. But are people harping back to some of those malted grains as well, or I don't know who wants to take that.
Yeah, there is some conversations been had. In fairness, malting of oats can be difficult. It tends to get, when you load it up with water to get it to germinate. Look, we all know what wet oats is. It's porridge if you're not careful. So it is challenging to malt oats. That being said, we do sell quite a lot of malted oats on behalf of another malting company that we distribute for in Ireland, mostly to the brewing sector. So we've seen a huge growth in malted oats into breweries over the last year or two, and that would be a result of mostly those hazy IPAs that that people in the brewing sector are shooting for. Distilleries, we haven't seen so much. There has been small, curious conversations, but nothing really significant. And it would be the same for rye and for wheat. There's been some, but people just haven't been. There hasn't been a huge amount. But I do think that'll change, because I think the GI does, no matter what that way that changes, it is going to be restricted to those grains. It is going to be restricted to wheat, barley, oats, and rye. I think, and probably maybe maize. So whatever we do to be innovative and whatever we do to be creative is going to have to be restricted within those grains and within their percentages and within their level of malting and type of malting that we expose those grains to. So that will surely change over time.
Michal Bernach come back in again with questions. He said, any negatives or challenges you found in moving into growing for the brewing distilling industry? And he says he'd be highly insulted if you say you have to work with demanding distillers. So any challenges moving in now?
Next question.
Yeah.
There has been. There's some point in pretending there hasn't. If it was easy, everybody would be doing it. If it was easy, grain would be, things would be different. It's not. It is challenging, because growing for food and growing for animal feed is not the same. And we did have a background, a certain level of experience at it beforehand, which is fine, and got us a huge amount of the way there. But the quality standards that we have to achieve is not a subtle jump. It's a significant jump. And being honest, we did make some mistakes in the early days where we just weren't hitting the quality standards that we demanding of ourselves and that our customers demanding of us. And they were right to do so. So we did make mistakes, and looking back in it, it's I hang my head in shame when I think of some of the stuff that we mistakenly did. But other than that, it's been it's required investment in terms of plant and equipment, and in terms of people like Angus, and in terms of trying to build a brand from scratch, because it is difficult just to rock up to a distillery and knock on the door and say, hi, would you like to buy some grain? It's not something that is an easy sell. Distillers they're busy guys. They have.
I say they're ingrained as well. They're skeptical, and they're.
Yeah. I'm not going to speak for I'll let Angus speak that bit, because he's the guy who has to do that bit of it. But it is challenging, because, as you said, people are skeptical. They're ingrained. They have their own way of doing things, and it's hard to get people to change, especially over the last 12 or 18 months with COVID, when you physically can't meet people. So yeah, that's been bits of it. But Angus, if you want to expand on that, feel free.
Yeah, no, it's just kind of as you touched on. Obviously, there is a certain case of, as with anything, when you're making an introduction and people are saying, kind of the response is, it's not broke, we don't need to fix it, we're happy with what's happening. I'd still be very confident, especially in our Potstilled grains, the work that's going into those, especially selecting those grains, screening those grains at harvest time, the process that they go through, that the distilleries will see significant spirit yield increases off the back of using those grains. Obviously then, when a lot of these conversations are taking place over the phone or in a computer screen, it's hard to build up a relationship. So that's I'm waiting for the green light to go at every announcement, anxious to get traveling around every corner of the country.
Exactly. Well, lads, I'm gonna bring you both back in again. I'm gonna ask each of you to have your own point, but you come from different places. But Angus spoke last, so James, we're coming to the end. So if you wanted to leave people who are listening live or watching back with your closing points of Loughran family malt, what are the most important things you want them to remember as you go away and walk in? I'm still amazed you up in Louth. I'm here in Dublin looking at gloomy dark skies, and you look like you're in a lovely tropical fucking field somewhere.
Well,
But
I am cheating because I set up a ring light, and I'm not sure if that's making any difference. But when I switch it on, I can kind of light stuff up a little bit. So there's a guy walking past, and he's kind of looking in. I've got this little ring light set up in the field, and he's giving me all kinds of strange looks. What was the question? Of what lasting?
what are
memories
your closing remarks, summations? Where this is for some people the first time they've ever met Loughran family malts. This is your closing argument. What do you want them to go away and remember about you guys?
Is this where we get to do the sales pitch that you told us we weren't allowed to do?
Yeah, basically, go for it.
Look, I guess the one thing we'd ask distillers to bear in mind is that all grains are not the same, and the same that all barrels are not the same, and all stills are not the same, and all grains are not the same. And we believe that extra care and extra attention in the field and during harvest time and during storage does result in better yield, better extract, and also better flavour, or certainly different flavour. And I think that our last argument to distillers is just, look, give us a shot. You know, every business starts from scratch somewhere, and most distilleries in this country, you know, we all kind of started off at a similar time frame. We remember what it was like not that long ago, trying to get up and get going. We would like to have more conversations with more distilleries. We would like to see our grain being tried in more distilleries. It's not going to work for everybody. We don't expect that it will, but we love people just to give it a shot, and give it a fair representation, because we're certain there are benefits there, both in a production point of view and also specifically in a marketing point of view, where you can expand upon the backstory of the grains that go through that. And probably in pot still whiskies more so than any other, where that quintessential style of Irish whiskey with 30% unmalted barley and up to 5% other grains is so specifically Irish. To put it, to use grains which haven't been grown specifically for it is, I don't think is giving it the best shot at being the best whiskey that it can be. The end.
Fair enough. There you go. Angus, do you want to leave us any closing remarks?
Yeah, no, just obviously follow on from what James said, and that the phone is always on, or the email is always open to distilleries that are looking to contact with any type of request. We're hugely flexible, and that's been the most enjoyable part of my last few months involved in it, is learning what's happening in different distilleries around the country. Hugely exciting projects, very different projects from distillery to distillery, but that's been a great learning curve for me. As I said, yeah, we can offer a great degree of flexibility. I know you mentioned, Matt, triticale and sorghum. Any of those type of questions, always fire them our way. I think James has room for another crop in his rotation to keep him on his toes. But yeah, no, anything like any kind of queries on specialty malts, grain type specific growing arrangements, we're always happy to hear, and all ears.
Plan to field a triticale. I've no idea who I'll sell it to, but I'll sell the whole field to somebody for you. I just want to see what it'll do.
You can come
wheat and rye. I just want to see what kind of whiskey it'll make, and it's either terrible or amazing. There's no halfway house, right?
We'll offer to grow it if you offer your service as an agronomist for the season.
Well said, lads. Well, thank you so much to everyone listening at home, watching back or listening in on the podcast. Thank you so much to the guys from Loughran Family Malt, James Loughran, director, Angus Giggins from the Distillery Relations team. Thank you so much. You guys have been fantastic. Have a good night. Slán.
Thank you. Bye.